Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon to the last session of the day, I think. I certainly didn't expect this. You guys are here for the right session, right? Okay. I certainly didn't expect this. My name is Peter Provost, and I'm a program manager with Visual Studio Team System Architecture Edition. Now, you may know me more as the Robin Sandals Agilista from Patterns and Practices. Some of you may have seen me speak on test-driven development and other crazy things. But for the last 9 months, I've been working in Team Architect. And, you know, when I first made the change over, a number of my Agile friends would pin me down. It happened at TechEd. Would pin me down and say, dude, you abandoned the cause. How could you go to the big architecture guys, the big design up front guys? You gave up on us, man. You're a traitor. But the interesting thing is that for me, Visual Studio Team System 2010 Architecture Edition, I'll just call it Team Arc from now on, isn't about big design up front. And I don't see a conflict here, and I never have seen a conflict here. What this is really all about is communicating your designs, communicating your intentions, having capabilities and tooling to help you evolve, understand, dig into, figure out what's going on inside of your applications, right? And like it or not, whether you're an Agilist, and I heard some claps in here, or not, you need to do this. We're all faced with this every day. Because regardless of methodology, whether you're doing extreme programming, Scrum, RUP, something you made up, or nothing, nothing, you do need to communicate. You need to communicate design. You need to communicate intent. And even all of the Agile processes are going to call for what are basically kind of baseline skeletons of the way your system is going to go together. Right? A lot of people don't realize that in extreme programming, when they had this thing called metaphor, you know, one of the 13 practices, the 13th practice that nobody could ever figure out, what metaphor was really all about was describing the shape of your system at a high level. Right? In MSF Agile, they called it skeleton architecture, and my favorite is just to call it a 13-box diagram. Because basically what I'm saying is, it shouldn't take more than 13 boxes. So, this talk isn't about Agile, though, but you can imagine that since it's me talking, it's probably going to have a little bit of that kind of snuck in there all the way along. So let's move ahead a little bit. Now, a lot of people think about architecture and design as being either top-down or bottom-up. Top-down is often about, associated with the big design up front school, right? So we'll spend weeks, days, months, please not years, drawing models, drawing designs, creating the stack of binders that describes the end of the world, and then hand that off to some people to go and make. Well, bottom-up is actually what we're more likely to be facing in the world. Bottom-up is, some people will call it code first, some people will call it bottom up, but ultimately it's about dealing with the fact that we have assets, we have code, we have people moving, we got bits getting built, we got lines getting written, we got databases getting populated, and we would like to keep track of what's going on. We'd like to understand what's going on. We'd like to figure out what's there when we're handed things. So I have a couple questions, and we're going to do the applause thing. It apparently worked really well for Cameron. How many of you in the room would say, by applause, that you use one of the formal Agile methods, like extreme programming, Scrum, or any of those? Not bad. We're winning. Now, different question. How many of you work in an environment where, before you code, you complete the major portion of the architecture and design of your solution before you start? Okay? All right. Well, it seems that we often pretend that greenfield software development, that idea of we don't have anything to start with, is the norm. And more often than not, you'll see the Microsoft demonstration come out and start with a file new solution. And, I can't remember the last time I got to. And, in 15 years of consulting before coming to Microsoft, I really can probably count on one hand how many times I was fortunate enough to work greenfield. More often than not, what I'm left with is way too much code that I don't know anything about. Who knows who worked on it? Who knows how long ago? Who knows how it's put together? You probably have code. You might have a binary. They might not match. I was telling Jeff earlier a story where that one happened to me. They gave me a binary. They gave me the code. I compiled the code, and it didn't make that binary. We're all faced with dealing with this every single day. This is the real life. This is the real job, is we've got this pile, and we've got to deal with it. So Brian Foote and Joseph Yoder wrote a paper a few years ago called The Big Ball of Mud. Has anyone read it? It's a favorite of mine, but it's kind of a weird paper because it's got Monty Python pictures in it. And basically, they're describing the state of most software architectures. They say that most software architectures are big balls of mud, and it's a result of expediency. It's not a result of any intent. It's a result of expediency. We're faced with deadlines. We're faced with managers. We're faced with issues we got to deal with. And so you just whack it in there. And over the course of time, weeks, months, years, this thing becomes a big ball of mud. And that is the state of the architecture. And so how do you unravel the string? How do you unravel the mud? How do you figure out what's going on in there? Right? So we're here, we are doing this. We're building up this big ball of mud. We're slapping it all on. We're doing all our stuff. And we just, hope that, the next poor schmuck who comes along can figure it out. And more often than not, you're that schmuck. Right? I mean, I've done it for myself where I was the guy building the big ball of mud. And then 6 months later, they put me back on the project. So you have this legacy code base. You need to add features and capabilities to it. You need to build this thing up. You got to figure out, first of all, what's there so I can figure out where to start. Now, the most important thing to me, and this is consistent, whether I'm an Agilist or not, is making sure that I end up with something that's better than what I started. It's got to have features the customer wants. I got to get paid, right? Customer's got to be able to sell it, however that works out. And if you're lucky, it's actually better than when you started. I was a Boy Scout, a Cub Scout as a kid, and we had a rule that said, always leave the campsite cleaner than when you found it. I like to think that way about code, right? Now, you may have heard the broken windows metaphor, and that's really what they're talking about. They're saying, leave that campsite cleaner than when you started. So let's make sure that we end up there. But in order to do that, we have to know where we're going. So talk a little bit about architectural discovery here. So here we are facing this big ball of mud, facing this pile, and we need to figure out what to do with it. So let's pretend we are an Agile team. Duh, it's me. Getting ready to head into our first iteration planning meeting. Okay? And we need to get a sense of what is in this system because, of course, here we are. We're going to get handed stories. We're going to play planning poker. By the way, I got cards for all of you. Not all of you, but lots of you. We're going to play planning poker and estimate our work, but of course you can't estimate your work unless you know the world you're in, the system you're in, and how it's going to go together. We need to build our 13-box diagram, right? What's there? How do the pieces go together? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by showing you a feature we call Architecture Explorer. And Architecture Explorer and how it helps with this problem. But one last little diversion before we go there. I want to tell you, but set some context for what we're going to do. So many of the demos you see at PDC and TechEd and other things have got sample apps, right? Sample apps that somebody wrote specific for this purpose. Well, I decided not to use a sample app because that'd be kind of cheating, right? That wouldn't be very brownfield. So let me do another little applausometer. Anybody here play World of Warcraft? Okay. So if you're a World of Warcraft player, and in particular if you play a druid, you may have heard of a program called RAR. So RAR is an open source program that models the game mechanics of World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is one of these swords and fighting dragons kind of thing, right? Massively multiplayer online game. And ultimately it comes down to you put on the cool gear, and the gear gives you points, and the points lets you kill bigger dragons. Simplified. So what RAR is basically doing is running a model of the game mechanics of the engine. Right, of the actual game, running it outside in a WinForms application and letting you make really informed decisions about what the best gear is to put on. So I happen to be friends with the guy who wrote this. It's an open source project. It's the third most downloaded project on Codeplex. Shows you something about Warcraft, doesn't it? There's some money there. Now, I'm friends with him, and I said, hey, dude, I want to show your code at PDC. He's like, okay, that sounds good, fine with me. So for the purposes of my story, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that we're new to this code. We're a new team. Maybe it's not an open source project, and we're a small little company that's going to add some features to this, because Blizzard, the company that makes World of Warcraft, is about to ship a new expansion pack, and we're going to have to go in there and change the game engine and add some new capabilities. So we're going to walk into this code blind. Only a little bit blind. I played with it this morning. And we're going to try to figure out how this thing goes together. So let's get rolling here and get right into the bits, because that's what you guys like to see. See if it wakes up. Sweet. Yay. Caps lock. Oh, Hyper-V, 2 machines. There's number 1. And here's number 2. Yeah, sorry. 2 different machines, one running inside the other. Forget which password to type. So the bits that we're going to be using today for our demo are the CTP bits that are on the hard drive that you guys got yesterday. So I'm not showing you anything that you can't do when you get home. You can go download Roar and you can play with this stuff yourself. So I have the Roar solution open over here on the right-hand side. And it's not small, as you can see. Roar is more than 20 projects and 85,000 lines of code. It's not small. And, you know, we don't really know what's here. Ignore this little optimizer test. This is something I'll show you later. And there it is. And, I mean, it looks reasonably put out. I mean, there's the kind of the classes of Warcraft, but where's the engine here? How does this thing really go together? So I'm going to show you a little bit about Architecture Explorer and how we can start to discover what's there. This window I have here at the bottom will allow me to dig into it. Hopefully you guys can see it at the back. I can't make the font on this window bigger for whatever reason, so you have to bear with me. I'm going to click in this first column on a thing called Solution View. Now, Solution View has expanded out and is now showing me all of the contents, all of the things that are inside of that solution. Now, what I'm going to do next is select all of the projects of Roar. And then, let's see what we got. Take a look at what's here. Now, what we're seeing is a project dependency graph. Whoa, didn't mean to do that. Let me get some of these side windows out of the way. It's just trying to connect to my TFS, so we'll just ignore that one for a minute. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Right in just a few seconds on a project of this size, I was able to get a sense of what's going on there. These are now projects and project dependencies showing that very obviously Roar Base, it's got something important in it. So that's pretty cool. We're already starting to get a pretty sense that Roar Base might be the right place to go. There's a lot of interesting things you can do with the Explorer here, and I'm just going to show you a little bit on this one, and then we'll dig into it a little bit more. So you'll see a tooltip pop up here as I roll my mouse over. The color coding and the indication of what's going on here is helping me see. So in this diagram, green is a project, and so you can see the tooltip's telling me that. It's telling me its name, other things like that. As we dig into other diagrams, you're going to see more. You're going to see more colors. You're going to see more tooltips, and I'll show them all as we go along. This graph actually has a lot of interesting different ways to look at it. So this is kind of a horizontal look at things, and does anybody know what that is? I can zoom in on things. I can move around. This is all WPF based, so I can move around in it very quickly. I can do a lot of great stuff. But the one in particular, when I'm looking at projects and project dependencies that's interesting, is actually not a graph view that looks like that at all, but one that looks like this, which is showing me a dependency graph. Right? And as we get into larger projects with more interesting and complicated dependencies than this one, right, we had that one central node that everybody depended on. It shows up right there. This graph can be really, really instrumental in helping figure out what's going on. He's quick on the fader. Okay. so that's not bad. We jumped in and we got a really quick look at the big picture, right? We saw roughly what the 13 boxes of this thing seemed to look like, at least at the project level. We also could have looked at namespaces, and we could have started to dug into classes. But hold on, maybe we should dig into classes. So let's dig into that. Let's go and take a look at a little bit about the class structure that's going on in here. And just to focus our attention, we're going to start by just looking at F. We're going to start by just looking. Let's see. So I have all those. We'll do that. Do that. Do you at the back know why that thing keeps popping up? No? Whoa, is that the one I meant? I think I went into the whole solution. However, did you notice how fast that went? That was pretty cool. That's not what we meant, though, so let's close that one. Hey, there's the program, in case you wanted to see that. That's why, because as you can see over here in this first column, I actually had all of the projects selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull ourselves back and filter down just to the base, just that project that was in the middle that looked like the place we'd go and find the game engine, right? The game engine logic. And then I'll select all these guys and graph it again. A little more sane. We'll zoom in, and I'll start to show you what we can find here. Everybody can see that. So it's a pretty interesting looking graph, actually. The layout we're using here is one that we call force-directed layout. And if you're familiar with graph theory, it basically tries to make everybody equally far apart from everybody else. But some of these other layouts can help you see different kinds of things. And one of the interesting things about force-directed is, if I fit this guy all together, is sometimes you want to back out and not look at the text. It's a really interesting thing we've discovered as we played with this more. Back out, not look at the text, and look at the shape, look at the picture. It's an interesting thing. Sometimes with large projects, and large projects that maybe kind of evolved over time, you'll find a thing that we've started to call the Death Star. Right? One node in the middle and the whole world wrapped around him in layers, right? That guy, man, you make a change there, the world ends. And from an architectural discovery standpoint, as a guy rolling into a new bit of code, you probably want to know that's there and how important it is, because that could be a very tricky place to go and make changes. It's an area of risk, but it's also an area of opportunity, so it's good to find those. Now, in this project, there's a couple things lighting up, right? We can zoom in and take a look at this guy right here. Item location. Well, in Warcraft, items are things like gloves and bracers and chest pieces, pants and helmets. How that goes on your body is important, right? Where you wear it actually matters to the game. Item, this one right here, is also proving to be relatively important. You can see when I click on things, the lines that are in and out light up and really make it easy for me to discover. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can show you another capability here. Right? If I'm zoomed in like this, I roll my mouse over the line. First of all, once again, I get my little tooltip that gives me something. You can see that's a calls line. So it's literally, it's a method call. It also gives me this cool little button thingy. I can click that and shoot on down the line. Follow it around. Makes it one way to navigate the graph. That's kind of nice. I'll zoom back out so you guys don't need to see gigantic glowy bubbles. But since we're looking for the game engine, and we know the game engine is going to be looking at things like item, it's going to be looking at things like character, right? It's probably going to be running some statistics. We can start to select and figure out what's going on. And one of the guys who's standing here in the middle is this optimizer class. That one looks related. And this calculations also seems to be centralized to what's going on here. So this might be an interesting place for us to go look and start to think about where this engine might live for us. Now colors, again, I warned you we were going to see more colors. So here we have an interface showing up as blue, purple for structures and things like that. Let's take a look at some of these other views, see if we learn anything interesting. Because, I mean, we're playing around with this, right? I mean, this is the job, right? Trying to figure out how this thing's going to go together. Now, one of the first things that happened when I showed this off to somebody is they said, well, that's really cool, but, I need to see the code for character. Okay. Okay, well, character looks like a serialization class, doesn't it? Right? There's just a whole bunch of XML going on there. That one's probably not the one we're interested in. There's another one. Again, not so helpful, but this is what we're doing. The optimizer, however, is certainly looking more and more like an interesting place for us to go and find all the logic for what's really going on here. So we'll come back to the optimizer in just a minute. Stupid thing. All right. So remember, we're a little agile team. We're taking this application apart. We are trying to figure out where to go to make the changes that we need to make. We think we know what Blizzard's going to do, although they're a little bit unpredictable. And the optimizer class is looking particularly interesting for us. This seems to be a place where the system might be trying to figure out what's going on in the engine. So what might be interesting for us is to start to figure out what's really going on when it does some of this work. So let's dig in even deeper. We've seen project relationships, namespace relationships, class-level relationships. What's going on inside that class? Let's go see. Let's go see. So if we take a look at the Solution Explorer, one of the things I know when I was first playing around with this, I ran it. I know that the optimization thing is done through a piece of UI, and I found that optimizer class, but I'm not really sure how it gets called. But I do know that it gets called from the UI. So why don't we just have a quick peek up at the form. All right, so this is the form that runs. I push that optimize button. Okay, cool. Optimize button is going to fire off the optimizer for us. I wonder how it works. Well, okay, let's not instead. Let's instead take a look at how it works from a different perspective. That's just source control again. So what it's doing here is it's not behaving. How many demos have you guys seen today where the guy says, I promise you it worked 5 minutes ago? Just this one? Cool. Sweet. Only me, of course. Because I'm agile? Right, I didn't design it up front. I should have done more of that. Let's try this again. Okay. It certainly didn't do what it asked it to do. But it did, actually. I said only go too deep, which is the first call in, and then he obviously doesn't go anywhere else, so it was perhaps a boring one. Let's go to a different form. Another form might be much more interesting for us. I mean, this is what we do when we get a new code base, right? You poke around inside of it and you play with it. So I guess we're not being too far from the thing. So let's look at what this guy does, because this guy also does something interesting with respect to that problem space. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say in the entire solution, 3 deep. Yep. I'm having one of those wonderful times right now. Dead air, not good. Well, could I have worse luck? Keep closing. So what I'm trying to show you, and I'm just going to keep showing it while I talk, is Sequence Designer generation from a fairly complicated method, and show you some of the interesting capabilities that live there. Because it lets us do some really interesting stuff, like see some very interesting design patterns that are not pleasant. And that's really what we're looking for here, right? We're trying to figure out what's going on inside the system. keeps doing that? Close Visual Studio? Hey, you guys are smart. Okay. I can feel the heat coming from the back of the room back there. That's love? Is that what it is? That's love. All right, this time it's going to go. This time it's going to go. Man. Anybody else want to come? Okay. So I'm going to zoom out on this because there's some very interesting things going on here from a design perspective. And once again, I want to remember the talk is about architecture and how these tools are helping us. We don't know what the architecture here is. Architecture is about communication. It's about patterns. It's about understanding how the system goes together so you can effectively make changes to the system you have. Now, what a lot of people who may not have had this capability in the past don't know is that, like I mentioned, the Death Star. So the Death Star is an opportunity for us to find a pattern visually and quickly. There's a pattern here, and there's a problem here. And the pattern here is around isolation. And you may have heard of the law of Demeter. When you have a sequence diagram that's as long as this one with as many participants as this one is, and I backed that out intentionally so you can just see the shape. What you would really like to see is V's. You'd like to see a V, because that's good law of Demeter behavior. The law of Demeter says, only talk to your friends, not to your friends' friends. So, but what we're seeing here instead is call out and get something, and then call out to that guy and get something, and then call out to that guy and get something, and then call out to the next guy and get something, right? This is an isolation problem. We're not really being very friendly here. We're talking to our friends' friends a whole lot. And we can see that right here, right now, very quickly. Now let's zoom in and look at a couple of other interesting capabilities and characteristics here. So you'll see this is a full-blown UML 2.4 sequence diagram. For any of you who've been saying, where's my UML diagrams? But we've done it, yeah, I knew we'd get some claps for that. There's a couple of other interesting things, though. That big black dot's a new one. You remember when I did the generation of it, one of the things it asked me was call depth. Well, what do you do when the call depth exceeds the call depth that I've said? Right, so I said 3. And what are we going to do when the call depth exceeds 3? Well, we've created this little thing, this little black dot. And what's interesting about the little black dot is that what I can do with it is I can expand from here. He kept it off the diagram for now to keep things simple. But I can just quickly click that, and it'll expand out the diagram. Or I can pop into a new diagram that starts there and builds out again. Right, so if we expand it, he's going to reprocess the entire thing and then regenerate the graph for us, which lets us see, now we've got new stuff getting added in here. And that's what those black dots are all about, in case our UML wonks were wondering what that was all about. So that was, that's a very interesting thing, is to be able to just quickly fire off sequence diagrams. Now, I'm going to put away my team architect guy for a minute and bring back the Robe and Sandals Agilista, because there's another interesting thing I've been thinking a lot about and I've been playing around with, which is how this stuff might relate to TDD. Do any of you do TDD? Yay. All right. Good. So I started thinking, this could be really interesting from a TDD perspective. I could use this. And here's maybe how I might use it. Suppose I write a test. And the test that I've got up here is a stupid test, so we're not going to worry about it. But the point is, it's a test. I wrote this test. And maybe I expected this test to pass, or maybe I've already written the code. So I wrote the test failed, like it should have, right, TDD style. Then I went and put the implementation in the system that should make the test pass. And then I come back and run it, and it doesn't pass again. I run this test, and I say, okay, well, I'm good now. I did what I was supposed to have done. No, I didn't. But it's also very interesting, perhaps, to be able to very quickly visualize how the test runs. It's doing it again. Or not. It's doing the one node thing again, so lucky me. But I think you understand conceptually what I'm talking about, that being able to, with a keystroke basically, go straight from my unit test, visualize the code that's executing and say, whoa, I didn't know it was going there. I forgot something in my implementation. Right? The whole point of this is that these tools, these views, these models aren't just about coming down from the top. They're not just about designing, spending months and weeks designing a system and then pushing that down into the developers to go and build. These tools are about visualizing what you have. These tools are about discovering what's there and using that to make an educated decision. And so even in an agile context, doing TDD, sequence diagram generation, can be a very powerful tool to see what's going on. It's another view of the system that's happening down under the covers. So please forgive me for all of my messiness there. These, as we like to say, are early bits. These are your CTP bits, so you can play around and experience that too. So Wow, That Was Cool was written when it was working perfectly upstairs. Perhaps it wasn't. But as I said, it was very informative. We got a chance to see how the optimizer got called from within that form. We got a chance to see all those classes that were participating in it. We could see the for loops happening. We could see the structure of that method, which, as I said, was in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, not something we really wanted to see. There's a great opportunity for refactoring there, obviously, because we would, as I said, we would like to see some better isolation. We'd like to see some better, Demeter type stuff where, only talk to your friends, not your friends' friends. Okay, so here we are in our system. We found some interesting namespace and coupling problems, or interesting points, right? We found a little tiny Death Star growing there. That optimizer class looks interesting. We've got some interesting challenges faced with that class. And we've done some sequence diagram generation. But there's other interesting things that we can do. So what else are we going to do with models from an Agilist's perspective? Okay. So how many of you were in the lap around Oslo talk? Yes? Yes? Oh, I see hands instead of clapping, but yeah, it's all the same. So this slide's not new to you. Instead, so when the Oslo guys were presenting to you their stuff, they were probably mostly thinking or talking about being down here, right? Well, and so far what I've been talking to you about is being here in the middle, code-assisted. All right, so we've been using sequence diagram generation, Architecture Explorer, and those tools to dig around inside. Dig around inside the system and try to get a better understanding of how it works and what's going on. But from an Agilist's perspective, and I told you I was going to keep sneaking this back in, from an Agilist's perspective, the interesting thing about using models is a communication technique. Martin Fowler, when he was talking about UML, described UML in 3 ways, and they're very similar to this, right? And he talked about UML as a sketch, as being that top-level one. And this is really about communication. This is about communicating with your team. So a number of you applauded when I asked if you were actively practicing Agile techniques on your projects. Do you find yourself occasionally drawing UML diagrams on those projects? Well, of course you do. Lines and boxes are about the most wonderful thing ever invented for communicating very quickly with somebody else on the team. Now, what we're probably doing with them is drawing them on a whiteboard, drawing them on a napkin, on the back of your arm, and using them to work with the team. So the interesting thing here now is to say, we're going to use the Architecture Explorer to better understand the system. We're going to use sequence diagram generation to dig into specific problem areas. But we also are going to be using UML diagrams to communicate, okay, to share information. And we're not necessarily going to design entire architectures and systems from the ground up or from the top down, however you want to point that. But we're going to use them spot and point, right? So as an Agile team, we're going to be sitting down, iteration planning meeting, and we're going to talk about a story. We'll take a story off the wall. And we'll get the team together, and we'll start talking about it, and we'll design a little bit, right? But here's another question for you. How many of you have team members who aren't in the same office building as you? I live in Denver. Does anybody know where Microsoft is located? So I'm one of those, right? And we have team members scattered around the world. The fact is, dispersed development is a reality. We are all spread around the world. And that whiteboard in the conference room or in the team room is a wonderful thing for the people who can see it, not so good for the people who can't. So let's talk a little bit about using diagrams and models as a communication technique instead of as a design, like top-down, big, lots and lots of models design. We'll talk about the way an Agile team would use them, the way I've used them throughout most of my career. Now, what's the most common diagram that you think gets used? Somebody yell it out. Class diagram. So what we've done is we've created a model project, right? This is a project type. Some people say to me, why did you create a project type? Why is it a new project? And it's actually quite simple. The project in Visual Studio is actually the dominant unit of sharing among team members. Right? That's how we break up our world, and that's how we share things. We check them into version control. Right? We do a lot of things with projects, and so it was a very good way for us to organize our work and to enable some of those features. So what was it here? I heard class diagram? All right. So you guys knew we were doing UML this version, didn't you? Yeah? No? Silence. Lines and boxes, everybody's favorite. So in designing the system here, we've been digging through, we've found the problems, we've identified the situations that we want to change. Now, as we're working through the story, the developers, the testers, the project managers on the team are going to talk about that story and talk about how the implementation goes. Have you guys ever seen planning poker cards before? I mentioned these before, right? So everybody's got their little deck of cards, and everybody's going to pick out their estimate. But of course, an estimate has to happen with the assumption of a design, because when I hold up my card that says 2 on it, and you hold up your card that says 26 on it, or 100, we're going to have a conversation, aren't we? And that conversation is going to often be about things that perhaps I missed in the design, or that you over complexified in your thought of the design. And as we're having that conversation, we are doing design work, right? We're doing emergent design work. We're doing on-the-fly design work. And we're going to document that down using the class diagram and using some of the other diagrams we have. So good old planning poker cards with Visual Studio logos on them. By the way, there's a bunch of decks here, and a bunch of decks there, and a bunch of decks there. Don't get them now, but when it's over, please go get one. Take it with you. Take one, though. Share with the friends. Here in our class diagram, right, we can do all the wonderful things that you're going to expect to be able to do using a class diagram, right? We're going to create inheritance structures as needed. We're going to be creating associations between classes. We're going to be naming them. We're going to be describing them. And this is really about communicating, right? This is not coupled to any code asset. This is about the team describing what it is they want to build and having that conversation, right? So we come together. My 2, your 100. We come together. We meet in the middle. We find something. We agree on what it's going to look like, right? And we take this and we save it. Is this the same class diagram that you have right now? No, it is not. Right? This is a UML logical class diagram. This is disconnected from the code. Right? This is a communication technique, a communication tool that we have. One of the things that's going on that a lot of people may have noticed if you're sitting in the front row is this extra little window that popped over here on the side. It's called the Model Explorer. In a UML system, it's very, very common that the types on a diagram exist on other diagrams, and it's the same thing, right? So we have to have a central place to put those and a central place to manage them and see them. So as I create extra diagrams and do interesting new things, I can take those types and reuse them, and it really is the same thing. So here's my second class diagram, and I can drag that class back out. And this is, for those of you who are interested in such things, this is UML 2.4. And I don't know if you heard the news, but Microsoft joined the OMG. For those of you who find that important, or perhaps your boss does, C-level people and all that. So this is straight up UML 2.4, including, right, we have the ability to do profiles on these, right? So we've got this. So this is a class diagram. Everybody agreed. I heard it across the room. It sounded pretty unanimous. This is the one we like the most. But again, as an Agile developer, there's actually another one that I've used a lot. Really? Sequence is your? Well, we've seen sequence, so if we can draw our own sequences. I mean, don't think that I can only generate them. Activity, now we get it. I was hoping somebody'd find that one. Activity is actually probably one of my favorite UML diagrams as an Agile developer, because what's more often than not I'm describing is how it's going to work. So I put together a little skeleton class diagram like this that describes the pieces and how they relate, but also I want to talk about how that flow works. Or probably the difference between my 4 and your 100 was really about how the implementation is going to go together, not really just how the classes relate. So activity has actually been my favorite, and of course we have that. I want to point out while we've got this dialogue up, again, tiny font in dialogues, can't show to the back, but I'll tell you what they all say. So we have activity diagrams, logical class diagrams, component diagrams, sequence diagrams, and use case diagrams that are all UML. Were any of you in Cameron Skinner's lap around Rosario on Monday? Yes? Well, Cameron showed off, I'm not going to spend too much time repeating it here. Cameron showed off the layer diagram, which is also up there. The layer diagram is a very interesting one as well. Layer diagram, I guess there wasn't enough claps there. I was expecting a lot more claps, Sam. The idea behind the layer diagram, right? When you ask somebody to go up and tell you the architecture of their product, what do? Layer, 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 layer. The idea behind the layer diagram is to be able to take that, draw up what your layer structure is, bind those to the assets in the solution, and validate them at build time. All right? And so when you're done here with this session and you're looking for a session to watch in the hotel room on the videos tonight, go check out Cameron's talk, because he did a spectacular demo of that, and I think you'll find it very interesting. So basically, these layers we bring out, we describe our system, and we couple them up, and we get build validation on it. It's really nice stuff. So, but I'll admit the Agile guy in me isn't so sure about that one. I see Jeff kind of going, oh, maybe. Fair enough. Right. But activity was the one I heard down here that people liked the most, of course. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time drawing you an activity diagram, but I am going to mention a few things that are interesting about the activity diagram. All right. You know, the activity diagram is more than just a flow chart, and these activities, of course, relate back to the methods and things. So when we go and take a look inside of the model explorer, we're seeing all of these various types, the states, the nodes, and those things are all coming together. And these diagrams have been immensely valuable to me when I'm trying to communicate with people, especially in a dispersed manner. Have you guys ever had that problem where you're talking to a team member who's halfway around the world, and you need to basically explain something to them? So what we've got, and it's not in your CTP build, with all of these diagrams, is the ability to bind these things to TFS work items. Okay? It's not in your bits, and I apologize. It means I can't show it to you because I'm running the same bits you're running. But we think that's a very important capability, especially when we start to continue to talk about this dispersed thing. Right, so if you think about maybe those of you who were in Lori's Agile in Rosario talk, right? You saw the really cool Kanban storyboard chart thing where she had work items all laid out visually and horizontally and all that flowing and stuff. Imagine how amazing that is when a developer can go up to the chart in TFS, pull that work item down, and get their diagrams that go with it. Get the discussion of what happens. Class diagrams, activity diagrams, whatever else is you want, they're there. They're associated with it. They're related to your work. You have everything you need to go and get it done. And one I didn't hear anybody holler out for, but it always seems to be the one that I always used to have people wanting to draw, was use case diagrams. And I want to show you something interesting. Yeah, I heard it down here in the front. Everybody goes, use case diagram. I want to just show you one interesting thing about use case diagrams that we have that is kind of neat. So I'm going to go ahead and hook this guy up. That's not really the right direction, but you know what I mean. What I wanted to... Yeah, this use case is dependent on Tom. Now, what's an interesting one is this thing, right? So this happens all the time. You're meeting with a customer, you're a consultant, and the customer gives you, I don't know, it might be a single piece of paper, it might be a Word doc, a PDF, it might be an Excel file. And ultimately what it is, it's reference material. It's important stuff that helps identify and helps the developer and the team understand how this all works. Well, we should be able to take advantage of that. So we can go ahead and reach out and pick up a file, my spec file, and there it is, and associate it. Associate it into the use case, right? It's related now. It's there. So in this use case, which is associated with the work item, has got specification documents that help describe things. It's all now glued together, nice and friendly for you, so you can go out and pass this off and get your stuff built. Pardon me? Including versioning of the spec. Well, I associated that to the file, right? So the file would be in your project system. The file would be in an assets folder in your project system and checked in like any other member of your project. Maybe. Okay. Let's talk after. This is good stuff. Okay. So that was a little bit about our UML support. Do you guys like the idea of us doing UML? Yes? I didn't hear anybody calling BS on me, so. So what would we do? Continuing on, right? We'd go to continue to have our iteration planning meetings. I'm the Agilist again. Our stand-up meetings. And we'd continue to define these models, right? We've seen these. Oh, I didn't show you component. Do you guys want to see component? No? Silence. No components. Right, it's a class diagram with a different shape on it, right? Boxes and lines. So we're going to continue to use these to work through our stories, to describe this stuff for our customers. We're going to check them into version control. We're going to associate them with work items. We're going to do all that stuff, and we're going to send that out to our teams. We're going to have people pick it up through TFS and describe the system. And they will have we'll be using progression to dig into all these other things too. Sorry, not progression, Architecture Explorer. So let's go back and take a look at that again. Right? Let's look at that diagram. I wanted to show you something else that, so what happens when you start to dig into this a little bit more is a lot of interesting problems come about. And these are real problems that you may not have thought about yet. But I want to show you. Remember when I accidentally did this one? Oh, let me do fit so you can see it all. When I accidentally did this one that... let's change the view. Does everybody remember when I did this one just a few minutes ago? This is an interesting problem, right? Because you may face solutions, single projects even, that look like this. And we ran into this. So we were using this to do analysis of our own code base, of Visual Studio, to understand how Visual Studio is put together. And we run into these same kinds of problems, very large projects, lots of classes, lots of objects. And so we came up with a very interesting approach to dealing with this. Looks like a spider web now. And it's this. It's called level of detail. So I'm going to turn on level of detail. I'm going to have it fit. There we go. Let's get that guy down here where we can see him. So what level of detail has allowed me to do is to limit the amount of the diagram that I see. Okay? So now as I browse around and double-click on things, I'm walking around through the system, only seeing things that are one away from the one I'm looking at. So with really, really large models like this, again, remember I'm the poor schmuck, big ball of mud, all that stuff? It can be very overwhelming to face a graph like that. So I ran this against Enterprise Library. You know, I had mentioned that I used to be with Patterns and Practices. I ran this against the most recent version of Enterprise Library, and it's interesting. There's a Death Star hiding in there. And, but it's even bigger than this one, and I was able to do some really wonderful browsing through it, and when I went back and showed the Enterprise Library team what I'd uncovered, right, they immediately started talking about the kinds of changes that they were going to affect on the next version of Enterprise Library. And it didn't take very long to do. It did not take very long to uncover these challenges that were faced in the system. So hopefully that is another interesting thing for you. I'm going to show you another graph that's in here before we move on. So we've started to put in some graphs that are like, can I commonly want to do type things. In the CTP bits, I'm going to tell you right now, they are not the prettiest things in the world quite yet, but they're still very interesting and valuable in terms of what we can learn from them. So what he's doing right now, it's compiling the whole system, and then running the graph, and then starting to do grouping, and actually starting to collect things up by how they fit, and where they're contained, and what namespace they're in, and all those other things. And then it's going to start to show me the relationships between those larger groups of elements. And you can do all of this with Architecture Explorer yourself, but you've got to go digging through some interesting ways down here at the bottom. But since it's something people want to do all the time, we went ahead and cooked it in. I think it's still running. It is still running. How many lines of code did I say? 85,000 lines of code in 20 projects. So mostly what's costing us here is the grouping logic as it continues to try to figure out all the little bits that are inside. There we go. Right? So let me zoom in a little bit on this so you can see it a little closer, and then I can show you some of the interesting bits. So what we're seeing here now, these are, there's that wonderful thing again. These are all the projects. So these are namespaces, right? Namespaces and assemblies. And you see that little chevron at the top? We can actually go ahead and see, here are the classes for that chevron, but still in the same diagram. I probably shouldn't have picked the biggest one. I'm glad I'm giving you guys some humor. Which wouldn't be the same without it now, would it? Let's look at this guy. This guy's a little more sane in size, I believe. Right. So here we're now seeing that same graph, the same relationships of namespaces. And you can basically pop it open and run that other query that I ran on just the single project, right? So you can see why it took so long, right? He had to run all of those queries on all of them and then group them all up and collect them. But you know, performance is something that we are working aggressively on, and that actually really wasn't that bad for the amount of information I get out of this diagram. Because now that it's here, you can see it's performing almost instantaneously. So I'm able to zoom right in on this guy and continue to see the exact information I was seeing before, but in the context of the larger system, right? So here we are seeing tree, which in World of Warcraft is a tree. It's druids, it's a healing class, and they turn into trees and do crazy spells and stuff. So, all right. I think that's enough of Architecture Explorer. So I've been hinting at this all the way along, and I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes giving you some more, because you know I care about this stuff. So for Agile teams, architecture, it doesn't often mean the same thing that it means on more formal methods. Architecture is more about communication than it is about design. It's more about expressing intent and expressing where we want to go with our system and our solution than it is about defining exactly what we want and organizing the work. As I've said, all Agile teams use models, and regardless of whether we're doing big design up front or emergent design or whatever else you want to call it, right? Models and modeling techniques, like I'm showing you here with Architecture Explorer, activity, class, sequence generation, and all these other things are infinitely valuable to get different views and get better understandings of what's hiding inside that system, what's hiding inside that big ball of mud, and help us unweave that into something we can manage, something that we can leave cleaner than when we found it. Agile teams do create models on the fly, and we do couple them to work items, and we do draw them as we need them. And we've got all that capability now hiding in here as well. And the whiteboard is a wonderful thing. I love them. I've bought 3 of those big 8-footers and put them in my office, in my house. And I don't know where the third one's going to go, but have you ever tried to use a whiteboard in a dispersed manner? I have. I take pictures of them and scan them into the computer and mail them around. But that is just not a very effective way of sharing this information. Too much information is lost, right? A UML model and any other model has got not just the visual representation, but also interesting bits of metadata and history and the story that goes with them and the work item that's associated with and the user story and all those other things. We don't want to lose that. That's very important information for us. So that's why we've got the work item integration and some of the other things that we've got about putting this in your version control, putting this in your project system, putting this in the hands of you as you're working with the system. So hopefully that works for you. Makes sense. Feels right. So every system has an architecture, big ball of mud or otherwise. How many of you have a big ball of mud? How many of you think this can help you unravel your big ball of mud? So, communicating with your teams using these tools, unraveling that big ball of mud, right? Using the discovery tools to try to figure out what's there. These are the things that we hope we're helping you do here. So I have a little bit of a call to action for you all. So you guys are walking out, listen. Please, please, take that CTP and unravel your big ball of mud. Take it home. Boot it up. Use it. Play with it. And tell us what works and tell us what doesn't. Tell us what you like and tell us what you hate. Right? That's what CTPs are all about. And we're really, really interested in hearing from you. I'm very easy to find, so please look me up. As I said, we have cards and all kinds of other interesting things. And I want to point out a couple of other things before we end. There are still some more interesting talks coming up around Visual Studio Team System Rosario Edition. And we've got some great hands-on labs. I have some cards up here that I can give you that you can take away that will help you keep track of what all those things are. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. The hands-on labs are great. Please get out there and play with them. And now we'll go ahead and open up these mics for questions. And hopefully we got something to talk about. Please come on up to the front mics if you can. Yes. I see you right here in the blue shirt. Right in the front.
By the way, I saw you 2 Octobers ago at Patterns and Practices, but I'm glad you're here. Hey, how's this working with like SOA and the cloud, like Azure?
How's it working like SOA and the cloud? Well, what you're seeing right now, and what you're seeing in this release, right, there are more. If you're looking for cards, they're around the sides, and if you can't find any here, please go down and check the booth.
Yeah, why don't you throw me a deck while I'm asking a question?
They're gone already. I got scooped. So right now what this is part of the Visual Studio solution and project system. Okay? So you can expect that's where we're playing right now. Right? So we're not making any specific inroads into that space. Now, as far as designing things for that, I mean, what we've got is UML. So if you're describing things in UML, and you can describe those constructs, then these are tools you're going to be able to use to work with that stuff.
Right.
Hopefully that's sufficient.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Over here next, please.
Do you plan to have support for native code at any point?
Support for native code. In which regard?
C++.
No, not language. You mean like the reverse engineering?
Yes.
So right now we can't do it, and I certainly can't promise you that we will be able to do it. We were hopeful at one point that we would be able to, but right now I can say that's not really on plan for us to hit this release.
Yeah, it's a much more difficult problem.
It is. It is. Thank you.
Thanks.
Over there.
Hey, so Peter, are there any plans to introduce pluggable reference providers so that we can incorporate dependencies on things that might not be represented directly in a Visual Studio solution?
So
that might come from a database.
The Architecture
or,
Explorer?
Yeah, to the Architecture Explorer.
Yeah, so I didn't call that out explicitly because sometimes people don't want to hear about the under the covers. But the Architecture Explorer does use a provider model, and those providers can be created and plugged into it. In fact, right there in that list, if you were looking below what I was clicking on, there was one for browsing TFS work items, and there are others already in the box. So yes, you will be able to put your own providers into that.
Okay, so stuff like databases, service contracts,
The
external
world is your
systems.
oyster, sir.
Woot.
Understand that what Architecture Explorer is doing behind the scenes is mathematically a directed graph. So if you can produce a provider that can generate that directed graph information, then you should be able to get it in there. Yes?
How well does the Architectural Explorer work across a web service boundary? In other words, can it realize that this contract is dependent on that service and therefore generate the dependencies across that?
I don't know. I'll admit I haven't tried that scenario. I don't know. We would have to try it.
Well,
so,
I'm going to have to try it. So
yes, please do, and let me know what you discover, and let me know what you expected to discover, and if you have any thoughts about how you would like that to work it differently. We would love to hear that. Thank you. Let's go over here. Yes, please.
Are there any plans to put in code gen for both directions, or some kind of templating?
Okay,
where you could do code gen based off your diagrams that you spent time building?
Okay, so code generation, or what we like to think of as transforms, right? Transformations of model information. And when we talk about code gen, we're talking about transforming down from the model into something closer to code. And you may go all the way to code. So the way that works behind the scenes is the model information has an API that's accessible. And of course, inside of Visual Studio, we have the text template engine, which enables us. So what we're doing right now, what we're being sure to enable right now, is the ability to do those transforms down. Okay. Right now, I don't have on plan to ship code generation direct from class diagrams. And there's actually a number of reasons for that. I probably wouldn't put it on plan, even if I had the choice. Because one of the things I've discovered when tools that I've used that have done code generation for me is that more often than not, I don't like the code he generates.
That's why I asked about if you're not going to do it, at least provide a templating system
Of
where
course.
we could do it.
So all of the capabilities to do what you're describing are there. And we are going to be looking at things like Power Toys and other things. And it's certainly going to be something that we're making sure to enable and not to prohibit. Okay?
Thanks.
At the back, please.
Just a basic architecture question. Usually when we're re-architecting these big balls of mud, we run across these little teeny one-off business rules that really don't make any sense except in some person had a hair up their ass and wanted this particular rule at this thing. When we're re-architecting, any tips and tricks on how to make sure these little pieces of business logic don't slip through the cracks?
I think that's probably a conversation for a beer. We should, you'll buy me one? We should probably sit down and talk that one through. I mean, guidance type things about that are borderline between process and culture and tooling. I mean, some of it you can achieve, some of that kind of stuff you can start to achieve with layer diagram and its ability to provide compilation validation of layers and things like that. But I think you're really going farther down than that. You're really reaching down for much lower level items than just layers and namespaces and projects. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Let's have a chat afterwards and we'll talk about how we might be able to do that kind of thing. Back there, please.
Hi. My question is, how is going to, what in your opinion, how is it going to the shift from assembly development to artifact development is going to affect the life cycle in Visual Studio? Let me explain. The fellow talked about the SOA, and we are developing solutions based on BPL and content in SharePoint and so on. So the paradigm is shifting from coding to assembling artifacts. How do you think this affected modeling and the life cycle? And in even the methodology, like Agile versus perspective.
Wow, you guys are coming up with all the hard ones, all the interesting, crazy, weird, hard problems. That's good. It's restate the question. So yeah, restating the question. I think you were asking, when I'm building these heterogeneous systems that are made up of SharePoint sites and documents and Excel applications and who knows whatever else, and I bring all these things together into one big, large super system. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, general purpose modeling languages like UML, when you start to think about applying profiles and stereotypes onto those constructs, are capable of describing those things. Now, but never perfectly, far from perfectly, right? I mean, when you start to get into really difficult situations, anytime you start to apply complex stereotypes and profiles onto the UML models. So ultimately, in order to truly describe those kinds of situations where it's your custom world and your custom environment, one of the things you're probably going to want to be thinking about is modeling via DSL, right? And not trying to model at the general purpose. And whether you go with a visual DSL like the DSL toolkit or the kinds of things that we're seeing coming out of Oslo, you're going to probably be thinking about modeling your world differently.
Yeah.
Because it's a very complex environment that you're describing. But, again, it's one of those, I would encourage you to come down to the Visual Studio Team System booth down on the floor and grab one of our guys on a couch and have a chat.
Yeah. Just a little more time. The development case that you guys in Microsoft use it's completely fitable to this situation you told us. But in our business solutions, when you're building business softwares to custom solutions for enterprise, we rather develop on the more high level using all the kind of software that Microsoft provides using this kind of solution. So we develop in the, you do understand. I think the development case, the way the software engineering is structured in Visual Studio could have more adjustable situations to business softwares, not only to develop components and the point we are.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. I mean, you're starting to say that in these large systems that are very heterogeneous in a lot of different parts and a lot of different parts from a lot of different places, you'd like to see better support for that kind of thing in Visual Studio. Yes.
Yes.
Is that what I hear you asking? Yeah, I can totally understand your ask. It's a little bit beyond my scope as the architecture edition guy, but again, you should start to feel free to come down and talk to the different people. I mean,
90% of our development is WCF web services. 10% are pure C++ classes that are built in this situation.
All right. Yeah, let's talk about it some more afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been using FXCop and starting to look at SourceCop. Are you using those technologies to unravel what the code is doing? Is there any overlap there?
There is overlap. They're performing different kinds of things. You can think of the way that layer diagram works with its ability to do validation at compile time as being FXCop-like at an architectural level. And we're very interested in different kinds of things like that. FXCop is rule-based and precise down at the code level. And that's very, very valuable. But it's not telling you things at the design and architecture level. And so we're looking hard at the right way to address that problem because we think there's a lot of opportunity there for us. So, I wouldn't say I would say it's companion, not overlap.
Okay, so how about source cop? I mean, both of those have to walk through source code, or at what level are you guys taking it apart to analyze, like, the ROAR system that you've got?
So are you asking if we're using?
Yeah, are you using the same code components to do the analysis of the?
No, we're not. No, we're
Okay,
not. We have a
it's your
different.
own.
Yeah, we have different stuff underneath there that's pulling that code apart symbolically. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. This side. Yes, please.
Which edition will this be shipping?
So this is Visual Studio 2000 Team System 2010 Architecture Edition.
So not in the professional edition.
No, this is Team System 2010.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry? Can the diagrams be viewed in professional? Well, in the CTP that you have right now, the answer is no. I mean, right now what you have is you have Team Suite. We're working that problem. Because what you just described, we know is not acceptable, right? We know that's a difficult problem. We have to fix that, and we're working on it. So, right now, I can't really make specific commitments about how that's going to totally play out at RTM time, but I can tell you that in your existing the bits you have right now, it is Architecture Edition. Okay. Yes.
Mine is a similar request. In the SKUs that offer the modeling, what would really be useful for my company is to be able to create the model from an Architect Edition and then have the model viewable and possibly even editable by Software Edition.
Okay, so
Edition.
Let me repeat it back and see if I understood it correctly. So creating the model in Architecture Edition and viewable in...
Viewable and hopefully editable.
Hopefully editable.
Because the whole idea is to communicate with your developers, and if they can't give you that same level of communication back, you've lost a lot. Because you need to be able to provide them with a model and say, okay, what's your thought? And
absolutely,
they can move things around and edit the model, send it back to you. But they don't necessarily need the capability to create.
Yep, no, I hear you. So specifics of how these things are going to play out in the SKUs are not decided right now. That's really about the best I can give you. Yes?
I guess a little bit in follow-up of that is even if you prototype or reverse engineer the diagrams based on existing code and model something where you want to go to eventually generate or create new code, how do you link between the original diagram, the diagram that the model that you'd like to see be, and the ultimate result, without really destroying those pieces, because you want to have those relationships between those different points, basically. Does that
I'm
make
not
sense?
sure I understand. Did you understand?
I think what he's saying is he wants a start and an end, and he wants like checkpoints in between. So you kind of
And they're not really the same. I mean, you can't really just update them because the diagram, the model might be just different, and so you want to really have them separate but still related.
Right. So we certainly don't have plans for any specific features in that area, but I'm thinking that there are going to be, just pretty traditional version control approaches that will at least get you a start in that direction. But I think what you're asking for is something more. I think you're asking for something along the lines of the model itself or the diagram itself almost has versioning hidden inside of it. Is that where you were going for that, or am I?
If you're talking about refactoring the system, so you can analyze the old one and produce the new model, so the refactored one,
right.
be able to see the mapping between them.
Oh, so you're looking to compare two different diagrams and compare them to see the differences?
Yes, and relate them so that it makes sense, and even as you go further along, that you have that relationship exist somehow, so that not those people that did it only remember that, hey, there's this other diagram to look at, but it actually almost like a dependency. You have the new diagram dependent on the old diagram, and you can just relate them.
Okay. Yeah. They're going crazy up here. No, it's great. It's great. I love this. Let's tell you, that conversation is really cool. Let's make sure that we do that one out in the hallway because I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask their questions. Let's go back over here.
Okay. I didn't get it exactly, so maybe I'm asking the same questions again.
Okay.
So this unraveling only going to work for managed code. So you
the reverse engineering
Yeah.
that I showed, yes, the reverse engineering is currently only for
Okay.
managed code.
And I noticed all the classes in this project are pure implementation classes. So there's no like implements relationships. So how are you going to display this?
Well, actually, no. There were implements relationships. There were interfaces in there. There just weren't a whole lot of them in this particular project. So when we were unfolding that, we did see a lot of green nodes. We didn't see very many purple nodes. But that's just, I mean, like I said, I intentionally went out and got a system that I hadn't made up for the demo, one that I didn't write, and the author of that was not a big interface user, and so. You can. One of the things you can do is, as you're generating those class diagram or those Architecture Explorer graphs, there's a number of interesting different verbs you can use. The one I was choosing there was typically contains, which basically says, it's part of the container of the project. But there are also different ways to filter that down and to see only classes, only interfaces, only, right, a lot of different ways that you can filter that. And there's actually a query hiding behind all of that, which is what generates the graph.
Yeah, I am specifically interested in to see the relationships tied to the implementation, because this is what's important if you want to see what depends on what.
Yeah, no, they are there.
Okay,
they are there. Thank you very much. Yes?
There are quite a few diagramming tools on the market, including Microsoft Visio. So any plans to interoperate with those?
So we certainly have plans to make sure that we don't abandon you there. Again, when I mentioned that we have this API that lets us into the model structures and into the diagrams from behind the scenes, right? One of the driving forces behind that isn't just the idea of coming down and generating code from these, but it's also about making sure that we can enable import. And I think is that what you're asking about? Is making sure that we can import?
I mean, both import and export. I mean,
Yeah.
I can basically from the code I can generate diagrams using some other products, not
I
just
don't
Microsoft.
I don't have any specifics about what imports and exports we're going to be able to enable, but the capability of getting in and out of the model is there, right? And so, there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different products and a lot of different stuff. Bringing stuff in from Visio is a very high priority item for us. We know that we have a lot of customers who are using Visio right now to do their modeling, and we've got to be able to bring those diagrams in so that you can use them in the product. We know that we need to be able to do that. As far as all the other ones go, I can't make a promise to you about what's going to happen when and which tools.
But I guess it's just a silly question. Is there any standard for the interchange of the UML data?
There is. It's called XMI. And, pardon me? Which version? Well, yeah, which version of XMI do you want to use? Yeah, which MOF are you going to support, right? There's a lot of interesting challenges there. Yeah, so we know that this problem of getting in and out from your existing tools and from other tools, and the tools that your customers use and other things, is a very important one for us to deal with. And like I said, the most important thing for us right now is to make sure that we enable that, make sure that we get that. These are, again, early bits, CTP bits. And then which of those do we address first? And in order to make sure that the starting point for us, for you, is good. So I just don't have any direct, in terms of, like, which tool are you using right now that you, other than Visio?
Enterprise Architect.
Okay, Sparks. Okay, a lot of people using Sparks, yes? Okay. All right. If you could get Sparks into here, you're going to switch for me? Yes, yes. I saw a few yeses. Okay. Okay, let's go here.
Peter, an easier question for you.
Not a theory how to change the world and re-architect your process?
No.
Okay.
With regards to the CTP, because I was working through the April one, I certainly have seen this evolve immensely from there.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, as far as working through this, as you mentioned, kind of uncovering or peeling the layers, if you will, on our ball of mud. What's the easiest way to contact you, or what would you suggest? As we come across various scenarios. Just a means of.
Cameron, what are we saying about that? What's the best way for us to get feedback? Connect. Microsoft Connect.
All right.
Okay.
I just wanted to verify.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not that hard to find if that doesn't work out for you.
Okay. It's not really a question.
Okay.
It's following on to what the gentleman asked earlier.
Okay.
A lot of the stuff that you showed is really nice for component architecture and looking at things from a physical level. But at least in my line of work, when we're working with solutions where we're looking at building solutions for customers based on capabilities that other products provide, we're looking at basically tools to help us on the solution architecture, not necessarily the component architecture. So looking at being able to capture the user requirements and decompose that down to the physical design. Tools like Telelogic do a great job in looking at it from the enterprise architecture, being able to associate it with business, break it down to the solution as far as the logical components are concerned. I mean, it's great to have all the stuff from the physical level, but are you guys going to be looking at moving slightly higher? Because the reality is there's products like SharePoint, like CRM, a whole lot of products that have capabilities, and the direction is for people to use those capabilities rather than develop them from scratch.
Yeah. So right now we're not addressing that immediately. In the short term, we're not addressing that. We know that that's there. We know that that's a problem for you, but we're not addressing that immediately right now. So.
Thank you.
Yes. I was wondering if there is a relationship or going to be a relationship between TFS, UML, OMG, and all the Oslo models. I mean, is the idea that someday I'll be able to somehow generate Oslo models out of this and deploy them?
So you can certainly expect that we will be able to shred our models down into the Oslo repository. Yes.
Okay.
I just was thinking, import-export solution could be, idea can be solution for developer editions or professional editions easily. But my question was, is there any plans or already some ideas about supporting querying all those models, like
querying
query
models?
language?
Well,
or some APIs, like we will be exposed as regular.
Right, so we have these APIs that we call tool adapters that let you reach into the model structures. But the other thing that is, we talked about the providers that we're running in Architecture Explorer. There's an Architecture Explorer provider for accessing the model.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Cameron, you got a question?
Gents, I gotta save Peter right now because we've got a Ask the Experts thing that's going on in Hall G, and we can continue this party there.
All right, come to Hall G. We'll talk about this some more.
Great.